Breaking political news this morning, Michigan Republican Congressman and frequent Trump critic Justin Amash has just announced he is leaving the GOP. Amash writes in a Washington Post op-ed, quote, "Modern politics is trapped in a partisan death spiral, but there is an escape. Most Americans are not rigidly partisan and do not feel well represented by either of the two major parties. In fact, the parties have become more partisan in part because they're catering to fewer people, as Americans are rejecting party affiliation in record numbers." Joining me now is the perfect person to discuss this on this Independence Day, Maine Independent Senator and former two-term Independent Governor Angus King. Senator King, thanks for joining us on New Day. Let's start with getting your take on the latest person to become independent, Justin Amash.
Well, I think my first reaction is, hooray, my caucus just grew by 30% in Congress. No, I fully understand the decision the representative made, and I think he's right in terms of we're caught in this duopoly that is controlling our politics, and it really doesn't express the views of actually the majority of the American people. I know at least in Maine, about 40% of the people are unenrolled. That is, they're independent, not a member of either party. So I understand exactly what he's talking about. You go back to the framers. You're an expert on Washington's farewell address. He talked about the dangers of parties. Madison talked about it in the Federalist Papers. But sure enough, that's where we are. Now, the danger, I got to caution, though, you look at countries around the world that have multiple parties and all kinds of different affiliations, and then you end up with coalition governments. So you can argue it from both directions, but I think the important point he's making is he wants to speak for himself and not for one party or the other.
And of course, you've run 4 times, I believe, in Maine as an independent, governor, then senator. He's talking about running for Congress, and that runs into the buzzsaw of a Supreme Court decision that came down last week regarding the rigged system of redistricting, which they essentially said the federal courts can have no role in going forward. Does that decision trouble you as an independent and as a critic of partisanship in politics?
Absolutely. I think that was a terrible decision. It was a real abdication. Basically, Justice Roberts said, we can't figure this out, and therefore we're just not going to do it. I can't come up with a standard. I thought about that overnight, woke up the next morning, and realized what the standard should be. The standard should be if an apportionment system results in a grossly partisan swing one way or the other, then the burden should shift to the state to justify it on some grounds other than a partisan advantage. I think that's a workable standard. It's a kind of standard that we have in a lot of other areas of important constitutional law. And to say that partisan gerrymandering is it's a free, come on in, fellas, do whatever you want, I think is really bad. Gerrymandering is one of the real problems with the country. It's one of the things that's polarized Congress, because you have these districts where the Democratic primary is the election or the Republican primary is the election, and there's no real competition in the middle.
Speaking of the Supreme Court, the other major decision they had last Thursday was the census decision, which did not go the Trump administration's way. 48 hours ago, it looked like the Trump administration was basically saying, fine, we won't push ahead with the citizenship question. Then came the president's tweet. The result seems to be chaos, lawyers scrambling. What's your read on this?
Yeah. Well, I think it indicates certainly a level of confusion and chaos, as you said. But a friend of mine called me a while ago and said, did Donald Trump have a board of directors for his company in New York? And I said, I don't think so, because it's a family-owned company. And my friend said, that explains it. He's literally had no one in his life to say no to him. And he just can't stand it. And here's a case where the United States Supreme Court said no to him. And he can't accept that, and he thinks he can do things. The wall, he got a decision on building the wall today that he's not going to like, but that's the way our whole system is designed. I mean, the whole system is designed that no one has all the power, and he just doesn't want to accept that. And I remember, John, a moment when I was governor, and I had an initiative. The legislature wasn't cooperating, and I was mad as hell and said, why don't they do this? And the legislature and all that. And then I suddenly stopped and had an insight.
Now,
the insight was, I've got to persuade them. They have the power, and if I can't get them to do what I think is right, that's on me. not on them. And I think he's got to come to that realization. He's got to learn to work with Congress and the courts and all the other constituencies that have a part of this power-sharing system that defines the United States government.
Well, the opposite of that insight would be what Axios is just reporting right now, that the President of the United States is considering an executive order to try to add the citizenship question back to the census. Basic civic question, does he have the power to do that under the Constitution?
I don't think so. And the Constitution, by the way, is really clear that the count is of persons. It uses the word persons. It's even capitalized. And in the prior paragraph in Article 1, Section 2, uses the word citizens as the people that can vote. So the framers understood the difference between citizens and persons. The whole purpose of the census is how many warm bodies are there in the United States, not whether they're citizens or not citizens. I don't think he's going to be able to do it by executive order. My understanding is the forms have already started being printed, and his administration told the courts, you got to give us a quick decision on this because we have to start printing on July 1st. And, I just, again, our system, I hate to be the messenger for the president, is that it's checks and balances. And nobody has all the power, and that's the way it works. And if you don't like it, then you got to learn to work with the various people that have those checks and balances.
Speaking of a different system, this past weekend, Vladimir Putin said that the liberal democracy had outlived its purpose. You're a member of the Senate Intel Committee, the Armed Services Committee. Also this morning, reports that Vladimir Putin telling an Italian newspaper that President Trump spoke with him in Japan about nuclear de-escalation and that kind of strategic stability. Does that surprise you, and how concerned are you about this rising tide of authoritarian illiberal democracy, the growing connections between Putin and Xi in China, for example?
Well, I think it's very important first to make a distinction. Putin wasn't talking about liberal in the sense of our American politics, about, liberals and conservatives. He was talking about the whole idea, the whole structure of democracy, and that the people are free. And this is the 4th of July. Thomas Jefferson, all men, he meant to say all men and women are created equal. That's what Putin is disputing, the underlying principles of what we've developed in the world over the past 200 years. He's talking about dictatorship as being the best way to go. My father used to say a dictatorship is a great form of government if either you or a dear friend is the dictator. Other than that, it's not really what we want to do. So now you mentioned nuclear, de-escalation of nuclear tensions. I'm all for that. If that's something that they talked about, that's a good thing. A good start, by the way, would be to begin discussions and negotiations over the renewal of the New START Treaty, which is the basic nuclear non-proliferation treaty. If that would start soon, that would be a very good thing for the world.
Final quick question. Senate Intel Committee waiting on that final Russia interference report. Can you tell us when that might be released?
I wish I could. We're not delaying for any particular reason, but we're really trying to do a thorough job, John, and there are loose ends. There were loose ends left in the Mueller report, I believe, and we're trying to work through those. We're going to be issuing our report in sections, and I think the first section about election interference, that is the electoral systems of the states, will come out in the next couple of weeks. We're working on declassifying that right now. So I guess I would say we want to be right rather than fast, and so we're doing our best to cover all the bases.
There you go. Senator King, independent of Maine, happy Independence Day, and thank you for joining us on New Day.
Same to you, John. Happy 4th of July.